It began with silence. For weeks, Earth scientists had been monitoring strange anomalies in the sky. Unexplained fluctuations in satellite signals, a faint pulse emanating from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But no one had imagined this. No one had been prepared. At first, the media buzzed with speculative theories. Maybe it was a cosmic phenomenon. Maybe the aliens that ancient conspiracy theorists spoke of were finally making contact. But the atmosphere soon turned to panic. One by one, every communications satellite around the Earth blinked out of existence. The world's internet ground to a halt, followed by the global news networks. And then, the skies themselves began to darken. Massive ships, hundreds of miles wide, appeared without warning, blocking out the sun. The sheer scale of their presence was overwhelming. Emma Crane, General of the United Earth Defense Forces, stood in the command center of a military base in Colorado, watching as the first Zevrak ship dropped through the atmosphere, trailing an arc of fire. The ground trembled as it landed in the mountains, a silent giant crushing everything beneath it. There were no bombs, no overt acts of aggression. It was as if the aliens had arrived with one simple message: "We are here." General Crane, "We're losing contact with multiple sectors," reported Lieutenant Simmons, his face pale with fear. The overhead screens flickered as another pulse of energy passed through the base's defenses. The lights dimmed for a moment, then returned, but there was no hiding the horror that was beginning to unfold. "Any word from command?" Emma asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced. The whole world was watching. Earth's entire military structure was in chaos, scrambling to react. "Nothing. The President's office has been completely cut off," Simmons replied, his hand shaking as he tapped furiously at his console. "We've been shut out from every network. It's like they're trying to isolate us." Emma's gaze shifted to the large dark screen above her. It now displayed an image, a symbol, a blood-red crescent that appeared on every screen worldwide. The Zevrak had finally made their move, and humanity had no idea how to respond. Their message came next, a simple but chilling one: "Submit or perish." The voice was cold, detached. There was no anger in it, only an undeniable certainty that Earth's fate was already sealed. Humanity was insignificant to the invaders, mere ants beneath their feet. Emma knew that if the aliens had wanted to destroy the planet outright, they could have done it in an instant. Instead, they chose a calculated, almost methodical approach. A game. A test. She gritted her teeth. "Simmons, get me a direct line to the United Nations. We need a global response, now." But as Simmons tried to dial, the message flickered again on the screens, this time accompanied by the unmistakable thrum of military engines. A fleet of Zevrak ships, perhaps hundreds, glided into Earth's orbit, their dark hulls reflecting no light, casting a shadow that stretched across entire continents. The world held its breath. No one could have predicted how quickly things would spiral. Within hours, entire communication networks failed. Military units in North America, Europe, and Asia attempted to scramble their forces, only to find themselves outgunned, outclassed by the Zevrak's technological superiority. The alien ships emitted a strange, resonating pulse that interfered with all forms of electronic warfare, rendering Earth's military forces blind. In the skies over Washington, D.C., a Zevrak ship hovered, casting an enormous shadow over the White House. A massive beam of light shot down, cutting through the heart of the Capitol building with terrifying precision. A flash of fire, then silence. The government's leadership, once untouchable, was gone. The president, the highest military officers, vanished in an instant. Emma watched in stunned disbelief, her heart sinking. If they were going to wage war, it was on their terms. And humanity, as a species, had no idea what they were up against. Her mind snapped into focus. There was only one thing she knew for sure. Earth was on the brink of annihilation. And the clock was ticking. If humanity was going to survive, they needed more than just military might. They needed unity. They needed hope. And they needed to fight back. She turned to Simmons, who stood wide-eyed in shock. "Get me every leader we can contact," she ordered, her voice cold but unwavering. "It's time to gather the world's forces. We fight back, no matter the cost." As she spoke those words, Emma's thoughts turned to a legend, an old saying her father had passed down to her. The strength of humanity lies in its ability to endure, to rise again, no matter how many times we're knocked down. Now, it seemed, humanity would need to prove it. The blood oath would be forged. The invasion was swift, and within days, the world was thrown into disarray. Governments fell, cities crumbled, and Earth's military forces were scattered to the winds. But in the chaos, something remarkable began to stir beneath the surface. Resistance. Emma Crane's command center, now a shadow of its former self, became the heart of the global resistance. Surrounded by her most trusted allies, Emma began to piece together the fractured remnants of Earth's military forces. Communications were sporadic, but the message was clear. Humanity would not go down without a fight. In the dark corners of the world, from underground bunkers to hidden safe houses, cells of soldiers, engineers, hackers, and civilians had begun to form a fragile network of resistance. But there was a problem. No one knew where to strike. The Zavrak were everywhere, their ships hovering over every major city, their advanced technology rendering Earth's weaponry useless. And yet, Emma saw an opportunity, a glimmer of hope. The Zavrak were ruthless, but they were not invincible. The resistance had to find a way to exploit their weaknesses, to turn the tables. But that meant gathering intelligence, gathering allies, and most of all, finding a way to unite the fractured world. A meeting was called between the surviving global leaders. Emma was asked to represent the United Earth Defense Forces, and she accepted, though she knew it was a gamble. A fractured world could never hope to stand against an alien empire unless it learned to work together. And right now, humanity was far from united. As the meeting unfolded in a secure location, the tension was palpable. Leaders from every continent, many of whom had once been bitter enemies, now found themselves face to face with a common enemy. The United States, China, Russia, the European Union. They had all been brought to the same table, but the wounds of old rivalries ran deep. For a moment, Emma wondered if this would be the final blow, if human pride and old grudges would destroy the last chance at survival. But then came the voice of Dr. Marcus Shaw, a brilliant scientist who had once worked on the cutting edge of biotechnological research. He had become an unlikely but essential member of the resistance after uncovering key information about the Zavrak's technology. His research revealed something that could shift the balance. The Zavrak, despite their advanced weapons and tactics, were heavily reliant on a unique energy source that could be disrupted if humanity could find a way to harness it. Their energy systems are unlike anything we've ever encountered, Marcus explained, his eyes intense. But they are not perfect. They depend on a substance harvested from human blood, something we've yet to fully understand. If we can exploit this weakness, we can cripple their war machines. The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. Humanity's very blood, its most sacred resource, was being used to fuel the Zavrak's assault. The implications were clear. If humanity did not fight back, their world would be drained, their very essence siphoned away. But Marcus's discovery also offered a glimmer of hope. "We've identified several possible points of attack," he continued, "places where we might be able to disrupt their energy grid. But it's going to take coordination, something that's almost impossible with the current state of the world." Emma nodded grimly. The world's power structures were crumbling. She had seen it herself. The global leadership was fractured, and the military forces that remained were no better. But they had no choice. "We'll have to fight with what we have," she said, "and we'll need every last person. We have no time to waste." The leaders looked at each other, a mix of uncertainty and resolve in their eyes. It was clear that the old ways of thinking, national borders, old alliances, and personal pride had no place in the new world that was being born. Humanity's very survival hinged on unity, and though it seemed impossible, they all understood. Either they united or they perished. "General Crane is right," said the representative from the African Union, a tall woman named Amina al-Farouk, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We must put aside our differences for the survival of our species. This isn't about us anymore. This is about our children, our future." The room began to hum with a quiet intensity as the leaders slowly began to understand what had to be done. They would need to reach out to every corner of the globe, every scientist, every soldier, every civilian. From the slums of Mumbai to the heart of New York City, humanity's best and brightest would have to fight back, no matter the cost, and they would have to do it together. But in the midst of their rallying resolve, Emma's mind drifted back to the blood oath. It was an ancient concept, one of unity forged in sacrifice. Her father had spoken of it often during her childhood. The strength of humanity lies not in the individual, but in the bond we share with each other. That bond would have to be their weapon now. "We need more than just technology," Emma said, her voice low but firm. "We need the people to believe that this fight is theirs too. We need every person on Earth to take up the blood oath." The leaders exchanged uncertain glances, but in the end, they all agreed. It was their only hope. And so the blood oath of humanity began, and with it, the first true resistance against the Zivrak. The world was fractured, but something extraordinary began to emerge from the cracks. In the weeks following the meeting of global leaders, the call to arms spread like wildfire. Emma Crane had been the first to speak the words, but it was humanity itself that took up the banner. From the tallest skyscrapers to the deepest rural towns, a single phrase reverberated across every corner of Earth: the blood oath. It wasn't just a declaration. It was a promise to each other that humanity would stand united, no matter the cost. Emma had seen the pain, the fear, the devastation in the eyes of her people. But with the blood oath, she saw something else too: hope. It ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had once felt powerless, as though their very existence depended on the survival of the human spirit. Across the globe, small resistance cells sprang into action. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. No, they were doctors, engineers, hackers, teachers, parents. But together, they formed an army. The Zivrak underestimated humanity's resolve, and in that underestimation lay their first mistake. While the aliens' fleets dominated the skies, their victory over Earth was far from assured. Emma stood in the war room of the United Earth Defense Force's new headquarters, the remnants of what was once a covert military base deep in the Rockies. Now it had become the rallying point for all of humanity's scattered forces. On the large screens above her, intel was being relayed from all corners of the Earth. Sabotage operations in Europe, successful guerrilla strikes in the Pacific, human-made drones carrying vital supplies to the scattered resistance groups in Africa. But despite these victories, the looming question remained: how could they strike at the heart of the Zivrak's power? The problem wasn't just the enemy's strength, it was their impenetrable technology. The resistance had no real way to fight back on an equal footing. Traditional weapons didn't even scratch the surface of the Zivrak ships. But Marcus Shaw, with his genius for seeing patterns where others saw chaos, had found a potential weakness. It wasn't in their ships. It wasn't even in their advanced weaponry. It was in their network. The Zivrak communicated through a quantum encryption system so complex that even Earth's most advanced AI had failed to decipher it. But Marcus believed that by creating a network of human intelligence, by using their ingenuity, they could break through. The Resistance's strength wasn't in advanced technology. It was in their ability to adapt, to innovate in ways the Zivrak had never anticipated. But before they could act on this breakthrough, something shifted. A wave of terror swept through the global resistance when word came from the Pacific. The Zivrak had unleashed their genetically engineered soldiers, their brutal, monstrous creations designed for one purpose: total annihilation. These beings, towering and superhuman, were faster, stronger, and more lethal than anything humanity had ever encountered. Entire battalions were wiped out in hours, cities razed in minutes. It was clear that these creatures were not just soldiers. They were weapons of terror meant to break the human spirit. The blood oath had worked. People were rising up, fighting back in ways the Zevrak never expected. But now humanity faced its greatest challenge: how to fight a war against enemies who could crush them without breaking a sweat. In the midst of this new horror, Emma met with Marcus to discuss their next steps. He was weary, his usual sharpness dulled by the weight of the war, but there was a fire in his eyes. He had been working around the clock, his mind racing to find a solution. He had a plan, but it was one that would come with great risk. "We need to hit them where it hurts, Emma," Marcus said, his voice strained but resolute. "The key to their war machine is that blood energy source. It's tied to every major ship, every weapon. Without it, they can't function. But we need to get to their central processing hub, where they're harvesting the blood from the prisoners." Emma nodded slowly, taking in the information. "How?" Marcus gripped the edge of the table, leaning forward. "There's a facility in the Arctic, an abandoned base from the early days of space exploration. The Zevrak have repurposed it to build a massive blood extractor. It's underground, heavily guarded, but if we can infiltrate it and disrupt their operations there, we can cripple their ability to wage war." Emma felt a pang in her chest, the gravity of what he was proposing sinking in. The Arctic was a frozen wasteland, the perfect place for an operation so dangerous it could end humanity's resistance for good. But this was the kind of mission they needed: bold, audacious, and above all, necessary. "We'll need everything we've got," Emma said, her voice hardening. "If we succeed, we might just turn the tide. If we fail—" "We don't fail," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. The resistance was no longer a ragtag group of fighters. It was an army fueled by the blood oath. Every soldier, every civilian, every person who had pledged their life to this cause now understood that their fight was not just about survival. It was about their very identity as humans. No matter what the Zevrak threw at them, no matter how many genetically engineered soldiers or weapons of mass destruction they'd unleashed, humanity would endure. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the oath that now bound them all. The future of the Earth rested on their shoulders, and the road ahead would be filled with darkness. But humanity had never been afraid of the dark. It had always thrived in it. "We begin the mission at dawn," she said. The Arctic winds howled outside the makeshift base as Emma Crane stood before her team, the weight of the operation pressing heavily on her shoulders. The Zevrak facility loomed ahead, its jagged structures barely visible in the frozen wasteland. It was a place of desolation, a graveyard of forgotten human ambition, now twisted into a nightmare by alien hands. Yet, to Emma, it was the first real opportunity to hit back. The blood oath had bound the resistance together, but this mission would define whether humanity could truly stand against the Zevrak. "All right," she began, her voice low but steady, addressing the gathered fighters, soldiers, engineers, and civilians who had pledged their lives to the cause. "This is it. We're not just hitting a supply depot or a weapons stash. We're going after their heart, the blood extractor. If we can destroy that, we take out their ability to wage war. But make no mistake, this is going to be the hardest fight we've faced. We'll be outnumbered, outgunned, and in a place where survival odds aren't great. But we fight for something bigger than ourselves. We fight for Earth." Her words were met with a silent nod of agreement from the team, their faces hard with determination. Emma could see the fear in their eyes, but it was the kind of fear that drove them forward. The kind of fear that came with knowing the price of failure was the extinction of the human race. "Get ready, everyone," she continued. "This mission is more than just survival. It's a statement to the Zevrak. They thought they could break us. Let's show them how wrong they are." The team moved swiftly, slipping out of the base and boarding their transport. The sky was dark, the cold biting through every layer of clothing, but Emma barely noticed. She was consumed by the plan unfolding in her mind, the series of calculated risks, the twists and turns that would lead them to the heart of the enemy's operation. They couldn't afford mistakes. Not this time. They approached the facility under the cover of night, the landscape around them stretching for miles in all directions. The Zevrak had set up a perimeter, their alien technology monitoring everything in sight. Their ships hovered high above the ground, cloaked in the shadows, their presence almost suffocating. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. The plan called for a stealth entry, a few critical windows where they could infiltrate without alerting the entire facility. But once inside, they'd be on their own. Marcus Shaw's voice crackled through Emma's earpiece, a welcome sound in the chaos of the icy expanse. "We've hacked into their surveillance grid. You're clear for now. Get to the main complex, and we'll disable their security systems as soon as you're inside." "Copy that," Emma replied, the tension tightening in her chest as the vehicle slowed. It was time. They disembarked quickly, moving like shadows across the snow, weapons drawn. The wind howled around them, but the cold was nothing compared to the weight of the task before them. They reached the first checkpoint, a small, heavily guarded entrance that led to the inner compound. The Resistance's covered ops specialist, a former intelligence officer named Daniel Kruz, signaled for everyone to halt. "Two guards," he whispered, eyes narrowed, studying the perimeter. "We take them down silently. 1 second of noise, and the whole compound will be on us." Emma nodded, and within moments, 2 of her best operatives, a former Navy SEAL and a quick-handed ex-thief, silently incapacitated the guards. The door to the facility slid open, and they slipped inside, hidden by the chaos of their actions. The air inside was thick with a hum of alien technology, the walls lined with tubes and wires, pulsating with an unnatural energy. This was where the Zevrak harvested their most precious resource, human blood. The extractor, the size of a small city block, loomed ahead, its metallic surface glinting in the dim light. They could feel the energy radiating off it, the pulsing rhythm of alien machinery that drained humanity's life force. Emma's stomach twisted at the sight. This was what they were up against. Not just a war for survival, but a war for the very essence of their people. "We go in hard," Emma ordered. "Plant the explosives, and we move fast. Cruz, keep us covered." The team worked quickly, their hands steady despite the stakes. Emma placed the last of the charges, her mind ticking through every contingency. They were close to achieving their goal, but something gnawed at the back of her mind. A feeling of wrongness in the air, as though the Zevrak knew they were coming. And then it hit. The ground trembled beneath them, followed by a sickening whirring sound. The facility's central core, its heart, was coming to life. Emma turned to Cruz, who had already drawn his weapon, eyes scanning the area. "They know we're here," he said flatly. Before Emma could respond, the doors at the far end of the room slammed open. The Zevrak soldiers, monstrous and towering, stormed in. The genetically engineered beings moved with terrifying precision, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. They were faster, stronger than anything Earth had ever seen. "Move," Emma shouted, pulling her team into action as the first wave of Zevrak soldiers charged. Blasts from their weapons echoed through the hall, and the air grew thick with the sounds of combat. The Resistance fought back with everything they had, but the Zevrak were relentless. Emma could barely keep up with the chaos unfolding around her. She fired, aimed, and moved, every second feeling like an eternity. The team's resolve was unwavering. They would not let the Zevrak win. Not here, not now. "Explosives ready," Daniel shouted. "Get clear." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted toward the exit. The charges were set to go off, and if they didn't make it out in time, this would be their last stand. They had no choice but to push forward and hope the mission had been worth the cost. The ground shook again, this time with a deafening roar. The explosion ripped through the facility, sending shockwaves through the air, and the Zevrak's fortress of oppression began to crumble. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Blood Oath was beginning to show its power. Humanity was finally striking back. The explosion echoed through the frigid night, sending tremors across the icy landscape. The Zevrak's facility, once a fortress of oppression, was now a smoking ruin. But Emma Crane didn't have time to savor the victory. As the shockwaves reverberated, the team scrambled, running for their lives as the facility began to collapse around them. The clock was ticking. The Zevrak would not let this strike go unanswered. They were already mobilizing. "Move, move, move," Emma shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as the ground trembled beneath their feet. The team was close to the exit, but the Zevrak's monstrous soldiers had already begun to converge, blocking their path. "Get to the transport," Cruz barked, taking a defensive position with his rifle as blasts from the alien soldiers' weapons lit up the darkened hall. "I'll hold them off." Emma turned to him, her heart pounding. "Cruz, you have to." "No time for arguments," Cruz snapped, pushing her forward. "Go. I'll buy you the time you need." Emma hesitated, but only for a second. She knew the truth. If they didn't make it out of here, the entire mission would have been for nothing. She grabbed a hold of Daniel's shoulder, giving him one last look. "We'll make it. Don't let them take you." And with that, they ran. They burst through the entrance into the cold Arctic night, a fresh wave of alien fire just missing their heels as they sprinted toward the waiting transport. Behind them, Cruz's rifle fired off a steady stream of shots, creating a barrier of chaos to slow the Zevrak advance. But Emma knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. They had to make it out before the Zevrak sent their reinforcements. "Everyone in," Emma ordered as they reached the transport. The engines roared to life, and the craft lifted off just as a volley of plasma fire lit up the ground below. The Zevrak soldiers were close, too close, but the transport shot into the air, leaving the crumbling facility behind. As they ascended into the dark sky, Emma looked back. The facility was already consumed by flames, and the sight of the burning wreckage was bittersweet. They had done what they came to do, but at a steep price. Daniel Cruz had given his life to ensure their escape. "Cruz didn't make it," one of the soldiers said, her voice hollow. "He bought us the time, but he's gone." Emma's chest tightened, but she forced the grief aside. There was no time to mourn. Not yet. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. The Zevrak would retaliate, and every ounce of resistance they had built would be tested. "Get us back to base," Emma ordered, her voice firm, though her heart ached with the loss. "We need to regroup and plan our next move." The transport raced across the sky, the howling winds outside nothing compared to the storm brewing within Emma. The weight of the mission's cost was heavy on her shoulders, but it was a burden she would bear. For every life lost, every sacrifice made, humanity's fight had to continue. It wasn't just for Earth anymore. It was for every person who had believed in the Blood Oath, for every man, woman, and child who had pledged their life to this cause. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Days later, back at the Resistance base, the mood was somber. They had struck a blow against the Zevrak, but it had come at a terrible price. Daniel Cruz was mourned as a hero, but there was little time for grief. The Zevrak weren't going to let humanity's defiance go unanswered. In fact, they had already launched a brutal counterattack, sending waves of genetically enhanced soldiers and advanced weaponry across the globe. Cities that had once been safe havens were now burning, overrun by the Zevrak forces. The cost of defiance had become painfully clear. In the war room, Emma stood before the map, staring at the red dots marking the Zevrak's movements. Their retaliation was relentless, and humanity's limited resources were stretched thin. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. "The Zevrak have begun targeting civilian populations," Marcus Shaw said, his voice grave as he studied the intel. "They're using fear to break us, trying to make us turn on each other. We can't afford to lose sight of the bigger picture." Emma nodded, her mind racing. "We can't let them turn humanity into a resource. Every city they burn, every person they kill, it's just another step in their plan to erase us. We need to hit them where it hurts again," Marcus said, pointing to a location on the map. "Their command center is still intact. If we can take out their leadership, their structure will begin to crumble." Emma's fingers hovered over the map, considering their options. It was a bold plan. An all-or-nothing strike that could end the Zevrak's control over Earth or destroy humanity's last remaining chance at victory. "There's no guarantee we'll survive it," Emma said, her voice steady. "But we can't let them win. We take the fight to their doorstep." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. They had nothing left to lose, and the fight had come to a head. There was no turning back now. The days after the mission to the Arctic felt like a blur. The resistance had barely regrouped before the Zevrak hit with full force. Every major city across the globe was under siege, and it was only a matter of time before they would face a final decisive clash. Emma Crane sat in the war room, eyes bloodshot, her mind running over the same calculations again and again. The plan was risky, too risky, but there was no other choice. Humanity had no more time to waste. "The Zevrak are methodical," Marcus Shaw said, his voice cold and detached as he studied the latest intel. "They'd been consolidating their forces, setting up defensive lines around their command center. If we strike now, we might have a chance. But once we're inside their fortress, there's no escape." Emma glanced at the map of the Zevrak's operations, pinpointing their most critical nodes: command, supply, and blood extraction facilities. It all led to one place: their central command, the heart of their war machine. If they could take that out, the Zevrak would be crippled. "Time's running out," Emma said, her voice heavy with resolve. "We either make this work, or we lose everything. We can't afford another failure." A weary silence settled over the room. The loss of Daniel Kruse still hung heavily over them. His sacrifice had allowed them to escape from the Arctic, but the world hadn't stopped moving forward. They couldn't afford to let the momentum slip. The next phase of their plan was the most dangerous: an all-out assault on the Zevrak command center. It would require every last fighter, every last resource, and the full force of humanity's defiance. Emma looked around the room. There were no words left. The resistance had been through too much to be discouraged now. It wasn't just the military anymore. It was the world's last hope. Civilians, doctors, engineers, farmers, all united under the banner of survival. It was time to finish what they had started. The attack begins. The assault force assembled on the outskirts of the Zevrak stronghold, a ragtag army of soldiers, mercenaries, and civilians who had taken up arms in the name of freedom. The transport vehicles hummed with anticipation as they made their final approach, their engines vibrating beneath their feet. Emma was at the helm, her hand gripping the controls with the steady confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Time to finish this," she muttered under her breath, her mind replaying the faces of every lost soul, every friend, every ally, every civilian who had died for this moment. It was for them that they fought now. The plan was straightforward: storm the command center, disable the Zevrak's main power grid, and take out their leadership. No small feat, especially considering the strength of their genetically enhanced soldiers and the sheer size of the Zevrak's defenses. But it was their only option. The resistance had no second chances. As the team neared the perimeter, the first wave of Zevrak soldiers emerged from the shadows, their monstrous forms moving with unnatural speed. The transport doors slammed open, and gunfire erupted from all sides. The first clash of the final battle had begun. "Push forward," Emma yelled, leading her team through the chaos. Her rifle barked as she cut down one of the alien soldiers, the body crumpling under the weight of the blast. The resistance was outnumbered, but they fought with the desperation of a species that had nothing left to lose. The ground trembled beneath their feet as an explosion ripped through the air. One of their tanks had been hit. The shockwave sent several soldiers flying, but they continued their advance. Emma's heart raced, but her mind stayed focused. Each step forward was a step toward humanity's last chance. "Where's the command center?" she shouted over the noise, her voice tight with urgency. "Straight ahead," Marcus answered, his face grim as he gunned down another alien soldier. "The main doors are reinforced, but there's a side entrance. We've got to move fast." They cut through the carnage, pushing toward the side entrance, where they encountered resistance unlike anything they'd faced before. The Zavrak had deployed their elite soldiers, humanoid warriors enhanced beyond the limits of human endurance. These were the same creatures that had torn through the Resistance's ranks in earlier battles. The odds were not in their favor. Emma's squad split up, each team member taking a different position as they engaged the Zavrak in close-quarters combat. It was a brutal, unforgiving fight, the air thick with the acrid stench of blood and burning metal. She could hear the screams of the wounded, the roar of gunfire, the screech of alien blades cutting through the air. The Resistance was fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity itself. "Clear the way," Emma shouted as she shot down a Zavrak soldier who was charging at one of her teammates. "We can't stop now." They finally reached the side entrance, a massive blast door that stood between them and the heart of the Zavrak command center. Emma planted the explosives, heart pounding as she counted down. Seconds felt like hours. With a loud screech, the door buckled under the force of the blast, and they stormed in. The command center was a dark, cold place, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The central console hummed with alien energy, but Emma barely noticed. Her eyes were focused on the prize. The Zavrak leadership, gathered in the heart of their operation. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's future. "Hold your ground," she ordered as the Resistance advanced, weapons raised. "Take them down." The final assault had begun. The command center was a labyrinth of cold metal and flickering lights, the hum of alien technology reverberating through the walls. Emma Crane's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as she sprinted through the hallways, her team close behind. They had fought their way through the first layer of defenses, but the real battle lay ahead. The Zavrak leadership was just beyond the heavily fortified doors, surrounded by a force of elite warriors who would die before they let humanity succeed. "There's no turning back now," Emma muttered under her breath as they approached the final corridor. Marcus Shaw was already ahead, scanning the walls with his ever-watchful eyes. "We're almost there. The Zavrak command center's just through those doors." "Get ready," Emma ordered, her voice low. They had no choice but to breach the doors and hope the explosives would do their job. If they didn't, they would be overwhelmed. The group reached the last barrier, and Emma took a deep breath before signaling her team to move. In perfect coordination, they planted charges along the perimeter of the doors. The seconds ticked by, stretching out into what felt like an eternity. She felt her pulse pounding in her ears, but there was no turning back. 3, 2, 1. She counted down, and the explosion rang out in a violent burst of sound and heat. The blast reverberated through the walls, and the heavy doors were blown wide open. The Resistance stormed into the heart of the command center, their weapons raised and ready for the final confrontation. Inside, the Zavrak leadership stood in eerie stillness, their imposing figures shadowed by the low light of the central console. They were humanoid in form, but their features were twisted, cruel mockeries of humanity. Their skin glistened with an unnatural sheen, and their eyes glowed with cold, calculating intelligence. They didn't flinch as the Resistance charged in. There was no panic in their ranks, only a calm, terrifying certainty that this would be their victory. The first wave of the Zavrak soldiers moved to intercept them, their advanced technology a blur of motion as they unleashed a barrage of fire at the intruders. But the Resistance had come prepared. Tactical shields shimmered into place, deflecting the alien fire, and the soldiers returned fire with lethal precision. Gunshots rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. Emma dove behind a pillar, her rifle aimed at the nearest Zevrak officer. "Take them down," Emma shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Her team split into two groups, flanking the Zevrak leadership from both sides. The battle raged on, the two forces locked in a deadly dance of survival and strategy. The resistance fought with the desperation of a species on the edge of annihilation, but the Zevrak warriors were relentless. Enhanced by their alien technology, they were faster, stronger, and more deadly than any human soldier. Emma's team took casualties quickly, but they pressed forward, refusing to yield an inch. "Keep pushing," Marcus yelled from across the room, firing rapidly as he moved to secure their position. He was a blur of action, a machine in human skin, guiding their assault with a cool, calculating mind. "The leadership's right there. We need to reach them before they can activate the command." The Zevrak leader, tall, unblinking, and cold as ice, stepped forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Emma. The leader's voice was low, a guttural growl that reverberated through the chamber. "You think your efforts will change anything? You are nothing but insects beneath our feet. This world will be consumed, as the others have been." Emma's heart tightened, but she didn't falter. She had heard their threats before. She had seen the destruction they had wrought, the countless lives lost. This was not just about survival. It was about making a stand against the very forces that sought to erase them from the universe. "You've underestimated us," Emma shot back, her voice unwavering. "This is our world, and we fight for it." With a snap of her fingers, her team pushed forward, taking cover and working their way toward the leader's position. The fight became a blur, flash fire bursts from alien weaponry, the acrid smell of burning metal, and the screams of the fallen. The resistance moved in tight formation, never letting the Zevrak out of their sights. A moment of silence hung in the air as Emma caught sight of the leader's command console, a series of alien glyphs flashing across the screen. His fingers moved to activate the final defensive protocol. But Emma was faster. In one smooth motion, she threw a flash grenade, blinding him long enough to close the distance. She tackled the leader to the ground, her hands gripping his throat as he struggled beneath her. "It ends now," she hissed, her voice full of rage and determination. The resistance had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let it slip away now. From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Marcus, his rifle trained on the remaining Zevrak soldiers. With a single command, the rest of the Zevrak leadership fell. The once untouchable force that had terrorized Earth crumpled, leaving behind only the hollow echoes of their defeated cries. "Take out the consoles," Emma shouted, pushing the Zevrak leader aside. Now, her team worked quickly, planting the final explosives in key locations around the command center. The countdown began. They had only minutes before the entire facility would collapse. "We're out of time," Marcus yelled as he ran toward the exit. Emma nodded grimly. "Let's finish this." The countdown echoed in Emma Crane's mind as she bolted toward the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. The Zevrak command center was already falling apart, the walls shaking with the force of the charges detonating throughout the facility. She had no time to think, no time to breathe. The explosion would level the entire structure within moments, and she had to get out, had to survive. "Move. Now," she shouted to her team, who were right behind her. The heavy footfalls of the remaining Zevrak soldiers echoed in the halls, desperate and furious, as they attempted to regroup. Their empire was crumbling, and they would do everything in their power to take down the last remnants of humanity's defiance. Behind them, the final blast tore through the building's core, sending tremors through the air. The facility began to collapse inward, the walls groaning under the pressure of the destruction. They were running out of time. Marcus Shaw was the first to reach the exit, slamming the door open and ushering the team out into the cold, dark night. The others followed, each of them moving with single-minded determination. As Emma stepped outside, the night sky seemed impossibly vast, the stars twinkling overhead like distant beacons of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on her shoulders lifted, even if just a little. They had done it. The Zevrak leadership was gone. The command center was in ruins. But the war was far from over. "How much time do we have?" Emma asked, pulling off her helmet and wiping the sweat from her brow. 3 minutes, maybe 4, Marcus replied, scanning the horizon. "The explosion will be seen from miles away. If we're going to escape, it has to be now." Emma nodded. She could already hear the roar of Zevrak ships descending toward them, the unmistakable hum of their advanced engines vibrating through the air. The time for victory celebrations was over. They still had to get out, and they had to do it fast. The transport was already waiting, the engines idling in anticipation. The team ran toward it, ducking as Zevrak drones flew overhead, their targeting systems locking onto the resistance fighters below. Plasma fire erupted all around them, but the resistance was already in motion. They'd reached the transport, and the door slid open just as the first round of alien fire whizzed by. "Go, go!" Emma barked, slamming the door shut once everyone was aboard. The transport shot into the air, its engines screaming as they accelerated toward the safety of the atmosphere. As they ascended, Emma looked out of the small viewport, her eyes scanning the horizon. Below, the Zevrak command center was now a blazing inferno, the dark clouds of smoke rising like a funeral pyre. The first real blow had been struck, and humanity had taken the first step toward reclaiming its world. But there was no time to rest. Emma could already feel the weight of what was to come settling in her chest. The Zevrak were ruthless. They would retaliate. The bloodshed, the suffering, was far from over. Yet, in that moment, Emma allowed herself a fleeting smile. They had won. They had struck at the heart of the Zevrak Empire, and they had made it out alive. Against all odds, humanity had fought back, and it had won. "Status report," Emma asked, her voice still steady despite the weariness threatening to overwhelm her. "We've lost some good people," Marcus said quietly, "but we're still in one piece, and the Zevrak's leadership is gone. We hit them where it hurts." Emma nodded, but the smile faded quickly. "It's not over. They'll come for us, but we can't stop now." The team sat in grim silence, the reality of the war setting in. The resistance had taken the first victory in a long, brutal war, but this was only the beginning. The Zevrak would retaliate, and humanity would have to fight back harder than ever before. But Emma knew something now that she hadn't before. They were capable of more than just surviving. The Zevrak had underestimated humanity. They had thought Earth's defenders would bow to their alien might, but they were wrong. Humanity had learned to fight, to adapt, and to overcome. The blood of every fallen soldier, every lost civilian, was a testament to their resilience. The ship soared through the stars, leaving the shattered remains of the Zevrak command center behind. And though the galaxy still held countless unknowns, Emma Crane felt a flicker of hope burn inside her. Humanity would rise again. They had sworn an oath to never give up, and the blood oath was only beginning to bear fruit. The next battle would come soon enough, but for now, humanity had struck a decisive blow. And for the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to believe that victory was possible.